following presentation is brought to you by 987 Online Central. The content of this presentation is: can money printing be used for ethical space exploration activities? The content to be covered in this presentation are interesting questions to think about from a planetary level, inflation and money printing for space exploration, or for the discount thereof. What kind of discounts are we anticipating in the industry? The historical industrial references of the power of articulate psychological intelligence, the expected sentiment and judgment of regulators, the criteria of money printing, what would be the requirements and guidelines for people to participate within the money printing, and what will be the alternative to money printing, which is pretty much the lending cycle. How does that facilitate the whole engagement, and what do we do about inflation, and how does price control inflation? We shall then conclude by seeing the frame of mind of the wealthy, those that have it, and the perspective of those that don't have it. Interesting questions to think about on a planetary level. The following question's purpose is focused on showing that we have the resources to rehabilitate Mars and to build an organic planet with the help of civil engineers, scientists, farmers, geologists, doctors, and marine biologists. Do you know that in the early 1970s, two countries, the US and Russia, built enough nuclear bombs to kill the planet over 20 times over with less than 20% of the workforce population? Can you imagine what they will be able to accomplish now if they focus on good results with over 4 million strong workforce personnel? What will they be able to build with that kind of resource instead of building nuclear bombs to destroy this planet over 20 times over? What can they do with over 4 million personnel to make that kind of accomplishment? Do you know that just recently China built a dam able to stop the Earth's rotation by 1%, proving that the impact on a planetary level can propel or reduce the rotational speed of a planet to rotate at Earth's speed around its axis and around the sun to bring it 3 to 6 months closer to Earth? What that's trying to tell us is that China built a dam that was able to stop the rotation, proving that we have the applications to increase the rotational speed of Mars, to increase its gravitational force and rotation around Earth, to make it be around the 3-month, 6-month habitable range rather than the 6-month, 5-year range typically orbits around the sun. Are you aware that global warming has affected the coastline of America and around the globe enough to cause insurance companies to drop offering coverage in some places, proving that we have the capability of affecting the climate indirectly with all the environmental measures that we have in place? Do you know that the advent of lab-grown materials such as meat, organs, and stones, diamonds, take us a step closer towards creation, and how that will position scientists and engineers to build a planet? What does inflation and money printing for space exploration, or for the discount thereof, have to do with this whole engagement? And what does history tell us about change, solution, and inflation? From a historical perspective, few historical, economical, operational principles that change over the years that have minimal or controlled impact to cause inflation in historical times lead to greater productivity and prosperity, which are addressed below in illustrations or in sectors with minimal effects of inflation. This is to prove that each sector has a unique way of creating solutions only if a variety of checks and balances are used in monitoring adoptions and solutions. In the service sector, the birth of the service sector underscored the fact that durable goods and services are now being traded and services being offered. However, compensation was warranted for services rendered because a solution or challenge was being addressed. I believe that the inception of the service sector in history, traditional tradesmen members would have argued that the fact that a tangible good was not being offered, so compensation for the service would be void or create some form of superficial inflation. However, the reality is that once an adoption of services was incorporated in trade and commerce, the value was gained for service and inflation was controlled. Another thing to look at is the capital markets. The euphoria and psychologics of investors, which is intellectually superficial, contributes daily to the productivity of the capital market, with the impact of varieties in economical checks and balances, with volume, demand, supply of stock just within the chart itself, prove that financial productivity benefits participants in the capital markets. And once again, we see inflation was thus controlled, even though something was created artificially that generated the move of money within a specific market. Within the intellectual property arena, imagination, which is the NAIC code 533100, which is a functional and fictitious, is a very unique productivity generator, which through the use of variety of checks and balances contributes across the board to all industries and doesn't have an effect on inflation, but creates something that really doesn't have a value that eventually has a purpose when it's been put into practice. Commerce. Slavery was believed to be the ideal approach of encouraging economic prosperity by ancestors, but the reality is that it led to less productivity as we now look back into history. The transportation, the adoption of cars instead of chariots led to an increase in productivity with minimal effect on inflation. Technology, computers and technology led more productivity with minimal effects on inflation. But we see all these added services and resources have an almost direct correlation with inflation, but the checks and balances within commerce are able to control it, and at the end of the day, we don't have an excessive growth rate of inflation. In healthcare, better medicine led to more productivity because people worked and lived better and had minimal effects of inflation across the board. Better health practices meant that people worked longer. The fact that they're earning more doesn't have a direct correlation with inflation, and the checks and balances in place to once again control inflation. If you look at international business relations, the stopping of poisoning and infecting of developing nations, genocide, and the reduction of slavery have greatly impacted national security's productivity and with minimal effects to inflation. So from a global perspective, commerce has presented more value rather than inflation across the board, because goods and services have been exchanged and revenue has been generated. Intellectual regulation. The ideology and impact of democracy is compared to the common system, monarchy, kingdoms, and empires, confirms that more freedom and ownership has led to better productivity and less impact on inflation. Another thing to look from a governmental perspective on how inflation would have been generated, but checks and balances were kept into place, and inflation never affected the members of a community. Moving along. On the sentiment of judgment of regulators, what we'd like them to have, the frame of mind we would like the regulators to have, will be like saying that regulation is important for maintaining the balance of interests of a community or a nation. However, it's through artificial psychological intelligence that engagements, trial, error, correction allow us to learn more about our future. Our appeal to regulators is not to be bound by the laws which they have enacted or to enforce like the Pharisees did in Mark chapter 3 verse 1 and 6, or Luke chapter 6 verse 6 and 11, and John chapter 9 verse 1 and 16. They questioned Jesus for healing on the Sabbath because it was considered work on the Sabbath day, which was a violation. However, we hope that through piloting programs, evaluation, review, and equal adoption to all members of the public, that we can build a better ecosystem to look at the challenges pressing the world leaders and communities, especially for space exploration, as they tackle money printing and its correlating effects to inflation and price control. On another topic, we are now going to reach the general criteria that we are hoping that would be required for people who want to gain access to this money printing. And given work hours constitutes given increases of amount of money printing in addition to the ordinary income that someone's actually making. And the first one to take us off is one must be able to work 40 hours to benefit from the given amount of $350,000 of stimulus printed money to be used for select accounts, and separate conditions applied if disabled, considered old, or retired, or have a unique condition. A majority of that income will be dedicated toward interplanetary commerce. Another second criteria is that if you choose to work just 40 hours, you benefit in receiving $250,000, and you have to follow the same guidelines as someone that's receiving $350,000 but only working more than 40 hours per week. If you choose to work part-time, you'll receive $150,000 for a variety of accounts, Majority are dedicated towards interplanetary commerce. And we have a similar criteria for folks and members in office, people that work for the government. A unique thing about what we're doing within our money printing campaign for interplanetary commerce is that we want to build a consistent revenue stream for people that work in government to be active participating in interplanetary commerce dedicated towards 2 days per week. We're not advocating a 4-day or a 3-day work week, but we are advocating that you work for an employer for the government for 3 days and you dedicate 2 days towards building your own private business. And we have similar criteria for those that are working in the government and pushing over 40 hours. They'll receive over $350,000. Over that particular amount will be dedicated towards interplanetary commerce and other specific engagements. If you choose to work 40 hours, you'll receive $250,000, and a portion of that will be dedicated towards interplanetary commerce. If you choose to work just per time for the government, you will receive $150,000, and a portion of that will be dedicated towards interplanetary commerce. As you can recognize, is that in order to build another planet, you have to have another income stream by default. In order to pay for a house in another place, if you're earning $80,000, you need to bring in an additional $160,000. If you look at the vastness of space and the distances that you actually travel, you'll need spots so people can actually sit and rest for a period of time. At the same time, the services may not be adequate, so you can mark up the price by over $100,000 depending on what the price point may fall in the future. The alternative that we're recommending towards money printing has to do with loosening the national and international lending guidelines and regulations for artificial credit origination by central banks. Pretty much allowing banks to originate loans out of thin air for the fact of giving loans to be offered to people with minimal criteria to build homes in another planet such as Mars, or an artificial planet to be made by scientists and geologists and engineers, proving that the fact that we've been able to build engineering structures to destroy a planet 20 times over within a span of about 10 years with less than 500,000 personnel. What then kind of team of engineers do with over 4 million workforce, dedicated contractors capable of building a planet, working with agriculturists, biologists, and marine biologists? We want the lending structure to allow people to borrow on borrowed debt to the capacity of gaining over $4.5 billion in a span of around 2 years, and invest $250,000 annually to interplanetary commerce and retirement investments pegged to the index in the stock market, so that they can get a return on investment to pay out their loan. It's just like in the modern for the zero down lending structures where you make no payments for 24 months subject to your credit. Will not have the same stringent criteria, but those models have worked in play in the past, and we're showing how it could be aggressively applied for interplanetary commerce moving forward. And the table that you're seeing over here is a lending schedule that depicts how the lending structure should be generated within a span of around 2 years globally. Pretty much you have someone in company A in one region opening up an account within a 90-day circle in another region, and using the money they received from the first region to fund the second region and take it to fund the third region, which increases by 4 times, and third the fourth region, and increases the borrowing capacity as long as they dedicated toward interplanetary commerce, and an index fund tied to the S&P index, which has had a consistent return on investment of about 10% over the span over the past 20 years, which we advise you consult with your financial advisor to look at. That way the debt can be anticipated to be paid at a future time over a 10-year span. This would in turn build a market for people owning assets in interplanetary commerce, and they're also comfortably able to afford other resources needed to improve the industry across the board. What you're looking at is how the lending structure would be if that lending cycle was adapted to all the 500 million business establishments on a global scale. What would be the global net worth of the global economy for interplanetary commerce for another planet or an artificial planet? It would grow the market by over $363 trillion minimum on a global level for one specific account. and that's what it takes towards the economical drive that's needed to generate to build another planet. If we sit and wait the average 20-year reproduction rate of humans giving birth and going back into college and training for a job, if you look at the challenges that you're presently having with going back to the moon, yet you did it over 60 years ago, they may never get off the ground. But if you aggressively stimulate the market directly for interplanetary commerce lending cycles and investment returning cycles to pay out the debt over a span of around 10 years, it will be able to balance off, and the balance sheets will not have tremendous amount of debt after 10 to 20 years down the line. That's once again just a summary that someone dispersing the funding account from the 250k investment rate of return that they're getting from the index fund to dedicated 20 accounts, interplanetary commerce, education fund accounts, medical research accounts, all focused on interplanetary commerce, transportational accounts. That's going to average over $16,000 being pumped into the private sector to support that engagement by over 500 million business establishments. And that's a highlight of some of the programs that are going to be covered by funding the mind printing accounts, educational programs, environmental programs, cleaning lakes, given the fact that you're increasing the amount of organic nutrition or fertilizer is not so good for the environment. So we need to actively build solutions that could actually clear it out of the system and build in-house solutions that could allow us to grow that fertilizer to build the material needed to grow another planet indoors. So those are the accounts that will be funded. Price control will be monitored, social welfare programs, disability, the elderly, those that are impoverished, seeing how they're growing without wealth. Are they making prudent financial decisions? How can a wealth manager educate them on this new opportunity? And what kind of resources can social workers navigate with them through those attributes? Another key thing to look at is also supporting religious programs. It's very important that people have a personal relationship with God, irrespective of their religious beliefs. It's very important that we support these causes, especially when people come to excessive forms of wealth. They'll get good, prudent education about managing those resources. International business development, if you're going into planetary, you cannot be mean with the universe, so to speak. There's enough to go around, and the educational phase of educating the international community to come to the same standard as G20 and G7 nations to participate in interplanetary commerce will be very important. Once again, the money printing is all central about interplanetary commerce, and that will be a dedicated amount, and we'll look into how to develop in other services. The robotics arena is also not to be left behind, because robotics will be able to do stuff that many astronauts will not be able to do. It takes away a lot of health risks that could be attributed and failures that could be attributed by relying on a human being within an environment that's not hospitable towards support in life. We also have another unique thing where we want people that are fixing robots are able to gain a royalty income from the robots that actually put in robotic hours, gaining up to 5 to 10% of the amount of income a robot generates on an annual basis. And we also want robots to be made domestically on a regional state level, not being imported or exported, so that it doesn't have an impact on the local workforce, losing jobs to robots not being made in a local area. You cannot have an economy if people are not earning or making money through a job. And one of the criteria that we actually had for the money printing is that they have to maintain a job full-time or per-time in order to receive these resources. So it's not just free money to lay around, it's money that it's been given to you based on the requirement that you maintain a full-time or a part-time job. Remedies of dealing with inflation. Now in this section we're about to dive into price control and inflation. We shall also take a look on historical factors on where inflation has penetrated the economy and things that they did with price control to stabilize the market. In Germany in World War I and World War II, stabilization of the currency included introduction of a new currency called the written mark in 1933, providing foreign loans to support economic recovery. And World War II measures to control inflation, including price control, rationing, and strict regulation on wages and rent, controlled how that inflation was being absorbed in the market. In Austria, in World War I, they faced significant inflation during the World War I, but the empire dissolved before specific measures could be implemented to curb inflation. So Austria was not successful with inflation, but as you can tell, in modern day Austria, it managed to bounce back from what happened way back in World War I. Russia, in World War I, nationalized the industry of strict control over pricing and addressing inflation. So they even though there's inflation, they controlled the price of goods, and the saving reserves were able to go up on a broader scale. And if you look at the amount of wealth that was created, especially from developed nations, the G7 nations, they had tremendous amount of cash flow, which allowed them to dominate globally. Japan in World War II had price control, rationing, and introduction of controlled currency systems, and imposed strict control over imports and exports to safeguard the growth of money flow. Italy in World War II had price control, rationing, and increased taxation, and government control of imports and foreign goods and services. So they were adopting policies looking by how countries adopted inflation issues post-war and through the war of World War I and World War II to control the issues of money supply. World War I and World War II would not have been fueled if it was not for inflation and money printing to a great extent. They never had the wealth, so they had to create the money to pay for goods and services. The commerce industries were not able to be supported by the wars, because by default, war is a liability account and takes out the asset growth value of businesses. However, if you're stakeholders on the equity statements of the balance sheets of war machines, they can regain profits. It's not structured like that for majority of the corporations throughout the global arena, especially in the time of World War I and World War II. So inflation was needed, money printing was needed to propagate economic stability and pay for the military goods and services across the board. In America, World War II, the price control and rationing and issuance of war bonds to finance government spending and inflation price control may have adopted with some impact on main intent over a period of time. However, we now do not have records on how the different regions and inflation responded. But what we've known is that post-World War II and World War I, the money printing that actually took place through inflation, America became very dominant on a global scale when it came to commerce and the economy. Now, looking at price control, what have governments done on given issues and challenges if we look at modern times to address the issue of inflation and price control? Well, they monitored or they minimized the amount of toilet paper purchases in COVID, not less than 3 years ago. The government controls the purchase of crops to some type of extent, and they control the pricing that commodities can be sold, especially when farmers have to deal with droughts, and they pay them crop insurance to mitigate the losses that have been attributed as a result of droughts. Apple, not a government entity but a private sector, controls how many purchases one can actually have when a new release of an iPhone actually happens, to control the hoarding and upselling of excess Apple smartphones. The same thing is conducted or done for controlling baby milk, which from time to time has a seasonal uptick demand from communities, and price control is needed to control the price of those specific commodities. Now, we're about to touch on a very unique phase about money and wealth and poverty, and what modern facts are telling us about wealth, poverty, and money. Many influencers, especially in the modern day, have become parents in the limelight, and they juggle those two responsibilities with grace and character. and there's a whole lot they can teach us. They need to share some of the challenges of being a parent and being successful have to do with the ordinary upkeeps of life, because they've been around money and success. Influencers are pretty much anyone who's pretty much wealthy within our presentation, and they can share us good gems that social workers can share with wealth managers to educate people who've not been around wealth and money on how to manage the resources. And when we have situations of relapses, would have programs to incubate those problems and rehabilitate people who are suffering from excessive cash flow. The same way that we have rehabilitated cannabis, making it legal, we've been able to build a structure all around it to the point whereas drug dealers are not being incarcerated, building records, and not having the psychological effects of being incarcerated or engaging in an illegal practice. That has a whole different attitude change on their perception of life and opportunity and how they interact with the community. And you would have that same type of experience if you made money being made accessible to people who do not have money through money printing for justifiable reasons, which were not addressed by the structures of commerce when economics was being put into play, and did not take into account that we will one day have assets in another planet. And we also shall be looking at how the sports athletes manage their money, learn from their failures and successes, how the academic arena prepares them for the huge responsibility they have with a tremendous amount of wealth that they're actually anticipating, and how they manage it through their lifespan. It will give us a very unique look and perspective from the academic arena. What kind of support system do they have outside of the academics and into the professional wealth management? And we shall also take a look at the modern day efforts of philanthropical programs. I think we can all agree that in modern day times, the amount of involvement of philanthropical activities has increased steadily, which is a very good thing, because we're seeing people giving back to the community and things of that nature, and the character that allows them and the relationship that allows them to build with the communities on a broader scale. When we experience what those people who are engaged in those programs go through, we'll be able to learn a whole lot. Another key thing that we want to cover at this point in time is a unique organization called Give Directly. Give Directly has actually been conducting research on giving money to ordinary people in parts of Africa. They've done this for a duration of around 10 years. They also do it on a national level throughout the US. They give money to people, especially to women who are pregnant and don't have enough adequate amount of income. And what their stats are telling us is that when people are given money freely, they may choose to open up a business, which may push them up around 6 months down the line, and they are back into the poverty stand. But some choose to educate themselves, choose to improve their nutrition, support the charity even though they're impoverished. And what that's telling us is that even though people don't have money, they can still make prudent decisions if they're given handouts, so to speak. The perception of a handout moving forward in the modern day society has to have a different analogy when it's put through the safety structures of the community of a social worker and a wealth manager coming together towards educating the community on managing their wealth. Another huge fact about poverty is due to COVID. What's actually happened is that as of 2020, the gap has widened between those that have wealth and those that do not. Another key thing to take into consideration is that the wealth of the wealthy has been increasing. So what is it that keeps them moving? What makes them wake up every morning and go to work? The fact that they have enough money to retire, they have a desire to actually go to work and actually earn an income. And what we'll find out is that being on vacation every single day is boring, because you're not around your friends, you're not productive, you're not addressing challenges that are able to give the experience that you can have the rewarding feel of actually being on a vacation. And they'll be able to share this more further insights to why they wake up every morning with that tremendous amount of wealth and have a need towards generating more income for their legacy. So these are things that we want that we want to present front and center as we're presenting this money printing opportunities in interplanetary commerce. Share with people that don't have it and see how they respond and what kind of solutions our community can put together to make sure that they're actually successful. In summary, we've touched on the very unique questions on thinking of, on a planetary level. Not long ago in the 1970s, the US and Russia built enough warheads to destroy this planet over 20 times over with less than 500,000 personnel. Elon Musk has been talking about using radiation to rehabilitate Mars. Well, I'm not a nuclear scientist, but if they have a way, we need to try and back them so that we can have a backup planet and learn from that experience. Another key thing about Mars is that it's not conducive enough from a structural perspective to support life and an excess gravitational speed to maintain a 3-month to 6-month habitable distance of around 56 million miles to make trips between Earth and Mars a standard. So what we're trying to say is that a whole lot of reinforced carbon fiber and graphene needs to be installed into Mars in order for it to be in a habitable range within 3 to 6 months of the 56 million miles between Earth and Mars to support life and make the economic transition feasible short term within 3 to 6 months. So that's a topic for another future discussion, which we shall be sharing on a separate podcast. We've also touched base on inflation money printing for space exploration, and we're also anticipating there will be a great discount in the market, which would actually be a very good thing. But we would like to be very dynamic in our planning and make sure that we have addressed the things that we can address from a money printing perspective. And we've also looked back at the history and how change solutions, inflation and price control affected given issues of inflation and price control in the history. We touched on the articulate intelligence of how different industries interact with creating value that may have a direct correlation with inflation. The sentiment of regulators, they should not just follow the law and not look at how we can adopt modern day solutions on addressing a problem from a different perspective, the same way Jesus healed someone on the Sabbath, which could be considered work. So that's a very unique analogy. And we touched on the key criteria for the mind printing recipients. What is the expected criteria? Work over 40 hours, gain access to over 350,000, dedicate over 100,000 towards interplanetary space commerce, amongst many other things. Work 40 hours, gain access to 250,000, dedicate 100,000 towards interplanetary commerce. Work part-time, work 20 hours, gain access to 150,000, dedicate 50,000 towards space exploration. That opens up a market for real estate investors who want people to be renters on their properties in another planet. We touched on the alternative to money printing, which is the credit element, moving through the global market and building upon credit within a 4 or 3 month cycle to accelerate the rate to which credit is actually generated and originated artificially to be offered to people to participate in interplanetary commerce for those particular type of developments. We touched on inflation and price control and see how price control keeps inflation in check. And we concluded by the frame of the wealthy and the people that don't have wealth. What makes a wealthy person get up every day in the morning, and why do people that don't have money use it for prudent decisions, given the fact that we have research taking us back over the span of about 10 years where they're making prudent decision purchases and they don't even have adequate amounts of resources. Ladies and gents, that concludes the presentation by 987 Online Central on money printing for space exploration to build a planet organically. Kindly get in contact to us to see how we could collaborate and move forward. We want to take your insights, what you think about it. Is it too much? Is it too little? Could we discount the price? We're open towards that idea, and we want to see how things will play out moving forward. Thank you for your time.